I have sat through 411 induction ceremonies in my life, and I have hated every single one of them. That is not an exaggeration born of a bad mood. I keep the number precisely because my father demands a report after each one, and a Drasch does not report an estimate when an exact figure is available. 411 ceremonies. 411 times some soft, unthreatened species has stood at that podium and told the Meridian Assembly the story of how gently the universe treated them on their way to the stars. 411 times the chamber has filled with polite applause for a species that has never once had to fight for the right to keep breathing. I am Vorik Thal, second son of Warlord-Emperor Thal Vorgan, heir to nothing in particular since my elder brother Kesser occupies that role rather permanently, and I am, as of this morning, once again, my father's unwilling eyes and ears in a chamber I would rather set fire to than sit in. Understand something about my people before I go further, because the rest of this will not make sense otherwise. The Drasch evolved on Kaelin, a world so hostile that the Assembly's own environmental registry lists it under a designation that translates roughly as actively trying to kill you, gravity 2.5 times standard, an atmosphere thick with sulfur compounds that would strip the lining from a softer species' lungs in minutes, magnetic storms that scramble unshielded electronics twice a season, seas of acid so caustic that our ancestors did not learn to swim in them so much as they learned to die in them slightly less often than the things hunting them. We did not rise to intelligence in spite of Kaelin. We rose because of it. Every other spacefaring species in this assembly evolved somewhere gentle, somewhere that let intelligence be a luxury rather than a survival trait. We were the only ones for whom intelligence was the last weapon standing between us and extinction. And so it grew sharp, and so did we. For a while that terrified everyone, and I will admit, in the privacy of my own skull where no one else can hear it, that I enjoyed the terror. We used it. We took the fear the softer species had of us and turned it into leverage, into trade concessions, into seats at tables we had no right to sit at otherwise. It worked beautifully for 3 generations, and then it stopped working, because it turns out that when your wars are fought from the command deck of a capital ship 100,000 kilometers from the nearest living thing, it matters very little how many acid seas your ancestors survived swimming through. Strength of body became a museum exhibit. We were recategorized, gently, condescendingly, as culturally aggressive. A diplomatic phrase that means exactly what you think it means, and which none of the delicate little herbivore-brained species who coined it would ever say to a Drasch's face. So here I sit, in a chamber built for beings half my mass, forcing my spine into a shape that will not shatter the ornamental seating, waiting for delegate number 412 to walk out and confirm once again that we alone among the thinking races of this galaxy know what it costs to have a body. "You are doing the thing with your jaw again," said the voice beside me, layered and rhythmic, half song, half speech, in the way that only a Vecini throat can produce. Silouan Kest, delegate of the Meridian Concord's second seat, first contact liaison, my closest thing to a friend in this entire miserable institution, and the only being in the chamber who has ever once made me laugh out loud in public. "I do not have a jaw thing," I said. "You have 4 jaw things, Vorik. This is your 5th. The Vecine are an unusual case among the Assembly's member species. Not Death World stock like mine, but not fully placid either. 2 closely related populations on the same world, competing for the same resources for long enough that they came to something resembling actual conflict before evolution or common sense intervened, and they chose cooperation instead. It is the closest thing to shared history the 2 of us have, and Silouan has never once let me forget that her people chose peace where mine would have chosen extinction of one side or the other. I let her have that one. It costs me nothing, and it makes her insufferably pleased with herself. How many times has your Concord watched a new species stand at that podium and tell everyone how their world never once tried to murder them? I asked. 100? 1,000? You ask me this every time, because the answer never changes. "It might today," she said, and there was something in the cadence of it, a held breath, a note she was not letting resolve, that made me actually look at her instead of simply enduring her presence beside me. "Explain." "You'll see," I hate when she does that. She has done it perhaps 6 times in the years I have known her, and every single one of those 6 times was worth the wait, which only makes the waiting more infuriating. Your people made first contact, I said. It was not a question. The Concord's delegation seal was displayed on the chamber's central dais alongside the sponsor markings, and I had noted it without really processing it, the way you note the color of a wall you have looked at 400 times before. We did, 8 months ago. Frontier survey drift, out past the edge of any charted lane, further than anyone else has bothered to look because there was nothing out there worth looking for. She paused. There was something out there worth looking for. Before I could press her further, the presiding officiant rose at the center of the chamber, and the ambient noise of 400 delegates murmuring in 40 different vocal registers dropped, layer by layer, into silence. Delegates of the Meridian Assembly, the officiant announced, voice carried and translated through the chamber's projection field into every language present simultaneously. We gather today to welcome a new voice to our community, a species discovered at the edge of known space by the Meridian Concord, whose culture and history I will not attempt to summarize, because they have asked, and I quote their liaison directly, to be allowed to, in their own words, introduce ourselves properly. Thank you very much. A ripple of amusement went through the chamber. I did not join it, I was watching the entrance. I present to you the sponsored delegation of the newly contacted species, representing what they call the Terran Assembly. Please welcome Delegate Naomi Reyes. She walked out from the side chamber alone. No honor guard, no procession, just a single figure crossing a floor built for creatures that were, on average, considerably larger than she was, and I understood immediately why so many species send their first delegates walking rather than let them be carried in on some ceremonial platform. It is a test, deliberate or not, of composure, and this one passed it without a visible flicker. She was smaller than I expected. Most delegates from soft worlds are. Pale, the way skin gets when a species evolves without much need for the kind of protective pigmentation that keeps a Drasch's hide the color of dried blood. Her frame was slight compared to mine, though I noted, with the same clinical interest I apply to every new species, because old habits from a warrior culture do not die simply because the wars moved to starships, that she was not as fragile as the paleness suggested. There was a density to her, a compactness in the muscle along her forearms and shoulders that spoke of a body built for load-bearing work rather than decoration. Species that evolve in low gravity or abundant, gentle environments tend towards soft, elongated frames. This one had not. Fine, I thought. Sturdier than most. That proves nothing on its own. She stepped up to the podium, and the chamber's translation field caught her first words and rendered them into 40 languages at once. Thank you, she said. I'm Naomi Reyes, representing what's left of humanity's various governments now unified, mostly, under something we call the Terran Assembly. I want to start with an apology, actually. Your officiant asked me to keep this brief and dignified. I am going to do neither of those things, and I'd like to get that out of the way first. Another ripple of amusement, warmer this time. I allowed myself a small measure of interest. Confidence I had seen before. Every delegate arrives with some degree of rehearsed poise. But there was something underneath hers that I could not immediately place. Something that did not match the practiced calm of a diplomat who has been drilled on protocol. It took me several more minutes to identify it. It was exhaustion, worn so thoroughly into the bone that it had become indistinguishable from composure. This was not a being who had rehearsed serenity. This was a being who had simply run out of the capacity to be anything other than steady. Our homeworld, she began, and the chamber's projection field bloomed to life above the dais, is called Earth. 3rd planet, 1 star, unremarkable system except that our star apparently had enough leftover material to build 8 planets instead of the usual handful, 4 of them gas giants, 4 of them rock. We're the 3rd rock. We like to call ourselves Dirt, if you want the literal translation of our oldest name for the place. Not very poetic. We're working on it. The system schematic rotated, and I found myself, against my own expectation, actually reading the data rather than letting it wash past me the way I usually did during this portion of a presentation. Radius, within 4% of Kalen's. Composition: heavy metal core, mineral-dense mantle. Gravity: within 6% of Kalen's own crushing pull. I sat up. Silouan, beside me, said nothing, but I felt her attention sharpen along with mine, watching me watch the numbers. Our world is mostly water, Reyes continued. About 70% of the surface if you're counting by area. 96% of that water is salt water, heavily mineralized, undrinkable without processing. And before anyone gets excited about parallels, yes, we're aware some of you have oceans like that too. Ours very nearly killed the first several hundred generations of anything that tried to live near it without adapting. The other 4% of our water, the drinkable kind, is locked up in ice caps, in glaciers, in a handful of freshwater systems that are, geographically speaking, wildly unevenly distributed across the planet, which meant that for most of our history, water was not a given. It was a thing you fought for. The assembly murmured. I did not. I was doing arithmetic in my skull, comparing her numbers against the ones I had memorized as a hatchling about my own world's brutal hydrology, and finding them uncomfortably close. We evolved, she said, in a strip of land that gets so hot during the day that exposed skin blisters within an hour, and cold enough at night to kill an unprepared body just as fast. Our closest ancestor species had to solve two completely opposite survival problems using the same body, on the same day, every single day, for about 200,000 years before any of us figured out fire reliably. We are, structurally, not built to be as tough as we act. No natural armor, no claws worth mentioning. Compared to almost every apex predator that shared our world with us, we were slow, we were weak, and we were, frankly, kind of a joke. She let that sit in the room for a moment, and I watched the softer delegates around the chamber nod along sympathetically, already filing her into the same category as every gentle, unthreatening species that had stood at that podium before her. I did not nod. Something in the rhythm of her delivery told me she was building toward a turn, the way a Drasch hunter builds tension before a strike, and I have never once misjudged that rhythm in another predator. It was strange and unsettling to recognize it in a body shaped like hers. So how, she asked, does a slow, weak, clawless joke of a species end up as the apex predator of an entire planet within a few 100,000 years? The projection shifted. A savanna, golden grass under a punishing sun, a herd of large horned animals grazing at its edge, and a scattering of small pale figures moving low through the grass toward them. This is a reconstruction, Reyes said, of one of our earliest confirmed hunting strategies. Watch what happens. The figures made their move, a rush, spears raised, and I expected from long habit watching predator documentation from 100 different worlds to see a clean strike, a kill, the swift, brutal efficiency that marks every true apex predator I have ever studied. Instead, it was a mess. The spears glanced off hide, the herd scattered in a panic, and the hunters were left standing in the dust, having wounded exactly one animal, which promptly ran off with the rest of the herd, seemingly unbothered. I frowned. Silouan, beside me, made a small sound that I had learned over the years to recognize as her version of a smile held behind closed lips. That looks like a failure, Reyes said, as though she'd heard my thought directly. It was by the standards of a single encounter. Watch the next part. The scene shifted. Same herd later. Hours later, the light changed, the shadows longer, and the small pale figures were still there, still moving, still following. Not attacking, following. The wounded animal was visibly straining now, limping, falling behind the others. We don't have claws, Reyes said. We don't have fangs built for a killing bite. What we have, what we've always had, more than almost anything else that's shared a planet with us, is the ability to keep going. Longer than the thing we're chasing. Longer than seems reasonable. Longer than it should be possible for a slow, soft, clawless animal to keep going. Another shift. Night now, the herd bedded down, exhausted from a full day of unnecessary flight, and the hunters, still moving, still following, patient in a way that made something uncoil, slow and cold, in the base of my spine. "This is called persistence hunting," Reyes said. "We don't outrun our prey. We outsuffer it. We let exhaustion do the work our bodies can't. It takes patience most predator species never need to develop, because most predator species can simply win the fight outright. We couldn't. So we learned to make the fight last until winning stopped mattering. I found that I had gone very still. Beside me, Silouan was watching my hands, and I realized I had curled them, unconsciously, into the loose fists of a Drasch preparing to stand. A posture so deeply wired into my physiology that I hadn't noticed doing it. Every predator species I have ever studied, including my own, hunts on the strength of a decisive strike. We are built for the moment of violence, not the hours before it. Patience of the kind Reyes was describing, patience stretched across an entire day and into the dark of a night with no guarantee of success, was not something bred into predators. It was something bred into things that had spent generations losing and refusing every single time to accept the loss as final. It carried forward, Reyes continued, and the projection dissolved into a rapid sequence. Small settlements growing into larger ones, rivers, the first agricultural terraces, roads, trade caravans, into everything else we built. We are not by nature an especially strong species. We are not especially fast. What we are, more consistently than almost any trait I could name, is stubborn past the point of sense. We have never been good at knowing when to stop. The projection darkened, and I understood, with the sinking certainty of a Drasch who has watched this particular kind of tonal shift in 100 different species presentations, that we were approaching the part every one of them eventually reaches, the part where the soft species finally admits to some small historical unpleasantness, and the chamber sighs in collective, gentle disappointment. I was not prepared for what actually came next. "I want to be very direct about something," Reyes said, "because I think it matters more than anything else I'll tell you today. Every species that has stood at this podium before me, and I've watched the archive footage of quite a few of them, preparing for this, has described a history of relative peace. Small conflicts, brief, low casualty, quickly resolved. I understand that. I even envy it. A little. That is not our history." The projection shifted to a stark, simple tally, a single number, rendering itself digit by digit across the field. 1.5 billion. "That is a conservative estimate," Reyes said, "of the number of humans who have died as a direct result of organized conflict between other humans across our recorded history. It does not include deaths from famine or disease caused indirectly by war. It does not include the deaths that happen every single year in peacetime from violence between individuals rather than nations. It is, by any honest accounting, an undercount." The silence in the chamber had a different texture now. I have sat through disgust before, through the polite recoiling species do when confronted with the fact of my own people's history, and I braced myself, out of pure old habit, to see that same recoil directed at her. It did not come, not fully. There was shock, yes, murmurs of genuine dismay rippling across 400 delegates, but underneath it, spreading through the chamber like heat through metal, was something I had never once in 411 ceremonies seen directed at a species confessing its own violence. Fascination. "We fought over land," Reyes said, "when there wasn't enough fertile ground to feed everyone who needed it. We fought over water in the parts of the world where it was scarce enough to be worth killing for. We fought over metals, iron, copper, the raw materials that let a civilization build tools instead of scraping by with sharpened sticks. And when we ran out of practical reasons to fight, we found others. We fought over which stories about the universe were the true ones. We fought over pride, over grudges that outlived the people who started them, over a woman two men both wanted and neither would share. We have gone to war over less than that. We have gone to war, on at least one well-documented occasion, over a disputed border drawn on a piece of parchment nobody involved had actually seen in person." She let the chamber sit with that. "I'm not proud of this history," she said, quieter now. "I want to be clear about that because I think some of you are bracing for me to glorify it, and I'm not going to. Most of my species looks back on our violent history with something closer to grief than pride. We built entire philosophies, entire religions, entire systems of law, specifically designed to try to stop us from doing what apparently comes far too naturally to us. We have spent thousands of years trying to talk ourselves out of our own worst instincts with what I would call mixed success. I stood. I do not fully know why even now, replaying the memory. It was not a conscious decision so much as a physical inevitability, the way a held breath eventually has to leave the lungs. Among the Drasch, there is a custom old enough that its origin has been lost to us, and every species in this assembly who has spent any time studying our culture knows it, though few have ever seen it used sincerely, rather than as an intimidation tactic during trade disputes. When a Drasch rises unbidden from a seated position during a formal proceeding, it means one thing and one thing only: full, undivided, respectful attention. Not aggression, whatever the posture might look like to an untrained eye. The opposite of aggression. It means you have said something worth standing for. I felt every delegate near me turn to look, felt the particular quality of alarm that passes through a room full of soft-bodied diplomats when the largest, most physically imposing being present rises abruptly to his full considerable height. I did not care. Silouan did not rise beside me. The Vicini do not share the custom, but she reached over briefly and rested 2 fingers against my forearm, a small private gesture that meant something closer to I see it too than anything else. Reyes noticed. Of course she noticed. You do not survive whatever built a species like this one without noticing every shift in a room. She did not falter, but I saw her attention settle on me for exactly 1 extra breath before she continued, and something in her posture recalibrated. Not fear, I would learn later, but recognition. She simply did not yet know what she was recognizing. I want to close, she said, with something that I think is the actual point of everything I've told you today, and I'd ask you to sit with it rather than let it just pass through you the way statistics tend to. We are not a peaceful species. I will not stand here and pretend otherwise because every one of you has access to more information about us than I could hide, even if I wanted to, and lying to a room full of first contacts seems like an unusually bad way to start a relationship. What we are instead is a species that has spent every generation since it learned to write things down, trying, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, always trying, to become something better than the worst version of what we're capable of. We built philosophy to argue ourselves out of cruelty. We built law to force ourselves to be fair when fairness didn't come naturally. We built entire institutions whose only purpose is to stop us from doing the things our own history proves we are, without question, capable of doing. I think that struggle, not the violence but the refusal to simply accept the violence as our nature, is the truest thing I can tell you about my species. We are dangerous. We know we are dangerous. And most of us, most days, are trying very hard not to be. She stepped back from the podium. The silence that followed was not the polite, slightly bored silence that usually follows a ceremony presentation. It was heavier than that, charged with something the chamber's architecture, built like everything else here for calm and gentle beings, did not seem designed to hold. I laughed. I could not help it. It came out of me loud and sudden and entirely genuine, a full Drasch laugh, low and rolling, the kind that carries across a room built for smaller lungs, and I did not care that 400 delegates who had spent the last several minutes recoiling from the concept of human warfare were now recoiling instead from the sound of my amusement. Silouan was laughing too, quieter, her layered Vicine voice threading a harmony under my own, and between the two of us we were, for one entirely undiplomatic moment, the loudest thing in the chamber, because I understood finally why the numbers on that first display had bothered me so much. A species with a homeworld that gentle should not have needed to develop patience that ruthless. A species that soft-bodied should not have built a hunting strategy out of pure, grinding refusal to lose. And a species with a history that violent should not have spent the entire second half of its presentation apologizing for it, mourning it, treating it as a flaw to be corrected, rather than a strength to be flaunted. Every other species in this assembly had evolved with the universe's permission to be gentle. Humanity had built gentleness for itself, by hand, against its own nature. the same way my ancestors built survival against a world that offered them none of it freely. We were not the same. I want to be clear about that even now, even knowing everything that came after. But for the first time since I had been old enough to sit in this chamber and resent every second of it, I was looking at a species I did not have to pity, did not have to condescend to, did not have to sit through with the particular species of boredom reserved for beings who had never once had to earn their own survival. The rest of the ceremony passed in something of a blur. Reyes fielded questions from the floor with the same worn, steady composure she'd opened with. Questions about human governance, about the fractured history of our unification, about whether Terran Assembly meant humanity had achieved actual political unity, or was simply better at hiding its disagreements than most species managed. She answered that last one, I noted, with a very small, very tired smile, and did not fully answer it at all. When the officiant finally closed the session, Silouan turned to me with the particular satisfied look of someone who has been proven right after making you wait for it. "Well, you could have simply told me," I said, "and ruined the look on your face?" "Never." She tilted her head, considering me with the mild, layered focus of a species that has learned to read Drasch body language better than most. "You like them." "I did not dislike them," I said, which is as close as a Drasch will ever come in public to admitting the former. I found her in the reception hall afterward, standing slightly apart from a cluster of delegates who were, from the tension in her shoulders, asking her exactly the kind of exhausting personal questions I had spent the better part of a decade learning to redirect during my own diplomatic obligations. I did not immediately approach. I have some capacity for patience of my own, whatever the presentation had implied about my people lacking it, and I let her finish extracting herself from the conversation before I crossed the hall. She saw me coming and did not flinch, though I noted the very slight recalibration in her stance. Weight settling evenly, shoulders squaring, the posture of a being bracing for a confrontation she intends to survive rather than avoid. I found that I respected it more than if she had shown no reaction at all. "Delegate Reyes," I said. "Delegate Thal." She had done her preparation too, then. Most first contact species stumble over the honorific structure of Drasch names for at least the first several exchanges, and she had not. "I was told to expect that you might want to talk to me. I wasn't told I should be worried about it." "You should not be," I said, and extended my hand, palm open, in the gesture I understood from my own briefings to be the customary human greeting. She looked at my hand for exactly 1 beat longer than a casual observer would have noticed, and I remembered, too late, the way I always remember these things too late, that an open, extended limb is not, among my own people, a gesture of welcome. It is a gesture of challenge, an invitation to a contest of grip strength that predates diplomacy by several thousand years, and I had just extended one to a being I had no briefing indicating she would understand the distinction. She took my hand anyway and gripped it, and did not let her composure slip even slightly, and I understood in that single unhesitating handshake more about the actual substance of her species than the entire presentation had managed to convey. "I would like," I said, releasing her hand with as much deliberate gentleness as I could manage, "to discuss the terms of a cultural exchange between our peoples, formally through proper channels, though I confess I am asking somewhat outside the bounds of my authorized mandate." "Your father know you're doing this?" "My father," I said, "will know by the time I have finished the sentence because he insists on reviewing full transcripts of everything I say in official settings. He does not yet know how he feels about it." She studied me for a long moment, and something in her exhausted, steady expression shifted into something warmer, something almost like the beginning of relief. "Neither do I," she admitted. "But I'd rather find out with someone who laughed at the right part than with someone who flinched at all of it." We talked for the better part of 2 hours after that, about hunting, absurdly enough. Once she discovered that Drasch ambush tactics and human persistence tactics were, in her words, the same coin flipped over, and about grief, and about the particular exhaustion of representing an entire species to an audience that has already decided what kind of monster you must be before you open your mouth. I told her, somewhere in the second hour, emboldened by whatever passed for human distilled spirits and the sheer relief of speaking to someone who did not require careful translation of my temperament, that I thought her people and mine might understand each other better than either of us understood anyone else in this assembly. She laughed at that, tired but real, and said she hoped I was right because she was fairly sure humanity was going to need every friend it could get. I did not ask her that night what she meant by that. I have wondered since whether I should have. What I did not see, what no one in that reception hall saw because it happened 400 light years away, in a chamber with far fewer witnesses and far less laughter, was my father, alone in his private study aboard the flagship Carvin's Reach, watching the full unedited transcript of the ceremony for the third time. Tal Vorgun does not laugh easily. He had not laughed once during the recording, not at the delegate's dry opening apology, not at the persistence hunting sequence that had made his own son rise unbidden from his seat in a gesture no Drasch performs lightly, not at the moment Vorik Tal, his second son, the quiet one, the one who had never once shown genuine enthusiasm for anything the assembly produced, had laughed loud enough to be heard across an entire chamber. He watched that laugh 3 times, freezing the projection on his son's face, and his own expression in the empty privacy of his study showed something far more complicated than approval. His elder son, Kesar, stood near the doorway, arms folded, having watched the same recording in silence. "You will let this proceed," Kesar said. It was not quite a question. "I will," Tal Vorgun answered. "You disagree with it." A long pause. The Warlord-Emperor of the Drasch Dominion is not a being who admits things easily, even to his own blood, and it took him a long moment to find the shape of the words. "I have watched 411 of these ceremonies across my reign," he said finally, "and I have never once seen a species stand at that podium and describe both a history of extraordinary violence and a genuine structural refusal to be defined by it. Every soft world we have ever catalogued has either never known war or has known it and built nothing to restrain itself from more of it. This species did both, and did them at the same time, in the same breath, without apparent contradiction." "That is not a disagreement," Kesar said. "That sounds like respect." "It is fear," the Emperor said quietly, and for a moment something old and tired moved behind his eyes. A species capable of that kind of restraint is a species capable of choosing, deliberately, when to stop restraining itself. We built our strength from a world that never gave us any choice in the matter. They built theirs by choosing it, every single day, against a nature that would clearly prefer otherwise. That is a harder thing to outmaneuver than simple violence. Violence, I understand. Violence I can calculate. A species that has taught itself patience on top of violence. That is not a calculation I trust myself to finish. And yet you will let the exchange proceed. Because to forbid it now, Tal Vorgun said, rising slowly from his seat, moving to the viewport where the stars sat cold and indifferent beyond the hull. With my own son already standing in that chamber for them, with the assembly already leaning toward welcome. To forbid it now would tell every species watching that the Drasch fear something they have not even seen yet. I will not hand them that admission. Not while there is still a version of this where my objection can wait, unspoken, until I understand exactly what it is I am afraid of. He did not turn to face his elder son as he said the rest, and his voice when it came was quieter than either of them was accustomed to hearing from him. Let the boy have his friend from the small gravity world. Let the exchange proceed. Let the treaties be signed. Let the chamber applaud itself for its newest peaceful acquisition. I will smile for the cameras and I will sign what needs signing, because the alternative is a war I am not prepared to justify starting over a feeling I cannot yet put a name to. And if the feeling proves correct? Tal Vorgun was silent for a long time before he answered, watching the slow wheel of unfamiliar stars through the viewport glass. Then I will have spent my reign smiling at the one species in this galaxy patient enough to wait for me to be wrong about them, he said. And I do not know, Kesar, which outcome frightens me more, that they prove me right, or that they prove me wrong and I never see it coming until it is far, far too late to matter. He said nothing further. The recording, forgotten, looped quietly behind him. His son's laughter, warm and unguarded, filling the empty study one more time before the screen finally, silently, went dark.